Hello and welcome to another episode of Mindful Conversation series of my podcast, The Anuj Kapoor Talk Show. In this episode today, I have with me Damayanti Chandrasekhar, who is a blogger, energy healer, and an editor. She aspires to write and teach healing for a living. She received a master's degree in communication from the Madras University in India, and her short stories have been published in several magazines, newspapers, and websites, both in the US and in India. She lives in Raleigh, North Carolina, with a family and loves beaches, books, road trips, and baking. And we are here today to talk about her book, Thank You Dadima, that is her first book with a strong inspirational theme. After nearly a decade of experience writing and sharing inspirational and motivational posts on her website www.punctuatelife.com, she found herself writing about the biggest influence in her life, her grandmother. In this episode today, she is here with us to talk more about this book. So, let us begin with the episode. Hello Dimenti. Thank you so much for joining me to this episode of Mindful Conversation series of my podcast, the Anuj Kapoor Talk Show. It's indeed a great pleasure to have you in this episode today.
Thank you for having me, Anuj. I'm really happy to be here and talk about my book. This is also my very first podcast interview, so I'm super excited about it. Can't wait to get started.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much once again. First thing first. So, tell me one thing. What took you so long to write this memoir on your grandmother, and what were your thoughts behind writing this book? Before you started writing this memoir.
So the idea to write a book came to me after her passing in 2009, but I
Mm-hmm.
always thought someone else would do it, like someone more qualified. But obviously, I
Okay.
think Tadima and God had like other plans for me
Right.
because I started my blog in 2012, and one of the first
Mm-hmm.
blog posts I wrote was about Dadima.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I was writing it, it felt like, there was so much I couldn't cover in a short blog because she was such a multifaceted person,
Mm-hmm.
and so many of her qualities and so many of the things I learned from her, I couldn't, like,
Mm-hmm.
pass it along in that short form blog. So then I
Mm-hmm.
ended up writing the book in 2016,
Mm-hmm.
but again, it took a while to get it published. Then an accident in 2019 made me prioritize publishing the book because I didn't want the book to die with me. It was like a wake up call for me.
Okay.
So I
Mm-hmm.
finally got it published in 2021. Yeah.
Okay. 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 Fair enough. I think it's really interesting. Uh, another question that comes to my mind is that since this is a memoir, so there must be some very emotional feeling. So, how did your family respond to this memoir on grandmother? I'm sure they must be very enthusiastic or emotional kind of thing. What were the feelings? If you want to share, what were they happy? Were they excited? What was their reaction when you came up with this idea of writing this memoir on your grandmother? Yeah.
So my family and friends were very excited, obviously, and my dad was very proud of me, and he
Mm-hmm.
spoke about the book like every chance he got. He spoke about the book. He was
Mm-hmm.
like my biggest promoter.
Mm-hmm.
So he even got Shashi Tharoor to write a review for my book. So
Oh, that's
mom
great.
and
Yeah.
dad were there for my
Mm-hmm.
virtual launch, and
Mm-hmm.
mom accompanied me for the book launch at Madras Literary Society.
Mm-hmm.
So I really couldn't have done it without their support. My daughter,
Mm-hmm.
again, she wrote the Amazon description for my book, and my
Oh.
kids were also there for my virtual launch. And I
Mm-hmm.
have some amazing friends who showed up for the book launch as well as the virtual launch. and so many
Mhm.
people from my extended family also showed up. So it was really
Mhm.
overwhelming to see all the support for my book. Many
Mhm.
people knew her personally, right? So
Mhm.
they were very excited about this book, and they were very happy that I shared so much about her that they didn't know, right, from
Mhm.
their
Right.
interactions with her. So I'm very grateful
Mhm.
for all my family, my friends, and for all of their support, because I couldn't have done it without them, honestly.
Right. Yeah, right. I understand. If you get so much of support, especially from the family side, I think it's really heartening and it's really overwhelming to receive support, especially if you're writing a memoir as
Hmm.
a tribute uh, to a family member whom you have
Hmm.
whom you may have spent a lot of time. So that brings to me to another question is that in your book, I see that you have never met your grandfather, but you have a whole chapter about him in your book. So was it difficult for you to bring his character in life while writing this book? What was your thoughts, yeah, on this?
So yes and no. I mean, it was because I've never met him. Obviously, that was challenging, but
Mm-hmm,
Dadima used to talk about him all the time, and
mm-hmm,
some of the stories she shared are etched in my brain because she's repeated them so many times. I just know it word to word.
mm-hmm,
And most of them are happy memories that she shared, or happy stories about my grandpa. The
mm-hmm,
sad ones she related only once in a while, so I had to go back and check with my dad if my version of it was accurate, especially the part about his illness and death.
mm-hmm,
I think those are, painful moments no one wants to recall, right?
mm-hmm,
So,
right,
yeah, so those things were challenging. Like I had to fill in some missing details and stuff, or, uh, you know, uh, events that I
right,
wasn't very
right,
clear
right,
about. I had to go back
right,
and check with other sources who were there during
mm-hmm,
that time, right? So
right,
yeah.
right, right, right. Okay. Uh, so, which brings me to another important question is that do you believe in ghosts and the afterlife? I mean, you have there are few sections in your book where you have related few stories in a particular book. So, do you believe in ghost and do you believe that there is an afterlife?
Yes, I do believe that the soul doesn't die, but
Mm-hmm.
simply moves on to another realm, right? I've never
Right.
encountered ghosts in my life, so I can't really answer that
Right.
question. But I guess it's possible. I mean, it's quite possible that, instead of the soul passing on, it gets stuck in this realm. It's
Right.
possible. So,
Mm-hmm.
what's funny is that I read that chapter on ghosts for my book launch at Madras Literary
Mm-hmm.
Society, and they actually filmed a scene for a horror movie in the very same building. It's a very old building. It was
Okay.
built in 1812 by the British, so it has like
Mm-hmm.
this very old structure and spooky kind of atmosphere. So
Mm-hmm.
whether ghosts exist or not, I think we humans are very much fascinated by
Right.
ghosts. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. 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 Yes. In fact, I haven't also seen Ghost, but I mean, every time, whenever I watch any movie or
Mhm.
maybe read a lot of things about uh, a lot of stories, a lot of
Mhm.
scary stories, a lot of haunted stories about certain
Mhm.
places. It brings chill uh,
Mhm.
into my entire body when I see those things. I don't
Mhm.
happen to believe that they are ghosts,
Mhm.
but when you hear those things, it really brings chill into my entire body. I mean,
Right.
I tend to fear that. Hearing
It
those.
Yeah,
Uh,
it can be a
yeah,
possibility, right? And you don't want to
right.
encounter it.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And I mean,
Yeah.
it just come to my mind that when something like that will occur to me, what will I
Mhm.
do basically? So, anyways, good thing is that I have encountered it. So, once we will encounter it, then we will see. But anyways, going forward, yeah, I think this seems interesting. And So, I wanted to know what was the most memorable experience you had while writing this memoir, and did you find challenging to write this entire memoir, and what was the most rewarding part in this book?
So the most challenging chapter to write was the final days and
Mm-hmm.
it was emotional because I went
Right.
to
Mm-hmm.
celebrate my grandma's 80th
Ha ha ha.
birthday
Mm-hmm.
and then
Yes.
ended up attending her funeral. So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
going through that, all the emotions again and again, and in that chapter was like very challenging for me. It was like
Mm-hmm.
living through it again, the horror of it.
Yes.
And the most rewarding part was, digging up stories about her that I never knew.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that was the most rewarding part because as I spoke to my dad and other people who knew her, more and more stories came up which I didn't know about. So it was interesting.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, I think I also happened to get a little emotional when I read that final part. I could feel that you must be feeling felt have you must have felt very emotional while writing that part, because that was the part that was bit of emotional. I mean,
Hmm.
I can very well understand that. Yeah. And
Yeah.
now to one of the most fundamental question I wanted to ask, maybe that would be helpful to the readers who want to uh, write a book, probably a memoir or any kind of book. So I wanted to ask, how much research did you have to do for this book, and what was your writing process like? If you could just elaborate, and how much importance you give to the research while writing any book, whether it is a memoir or a fiction. And this question I've asked to other authors as well. So I just wanted to know from you as to how much importance do you feel is the research part while writing, whether it's a memoir or any kind of a book. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've only written one book, and
Mm-hmm.
this book is mostly of stories from my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other stories of my grandma that I've heard from others. So like I said, I had to
Mm-hmm.
go back and check with the source if I got the facts right. So that
Mm-hmm.
was where I did the research, and then the dates and the names and all of that stuff. So that was mostly the research I did. It wasn't as intensive as research you would do for, say, if you're doing some historical fiction or something. You have to get your facts right, right? So it wasn't so intense for this book. And in the process, I uncovered like more stories about my grandmother, like I said. So for instance, I didn't know that her dachshund attacked a snake and saved her life. So my dad, I think, kind of filled in many of those details in the story that I've included in my book. So yeah, and about my writing process, like I've made it a discipline because I've been writing a blog for like over it's almost 11 years now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like something I do on a regular basis. So it wasn't very
Mm-hmm.
difficult for me to like sit down and,
Mm-hmm.
make that more regular. So when you're writing a blog, you probably do it like once a week. But when you're
Right.
writing a book, you want to like put in some time every day. It really depends on your timeline and
Mm-hmm.
how much time you have and when you want to. But I feel like having a disciplined approach to it and saying, okay, I'm going to, um,
Mm-hmm.
do this many words, or I'm going to do one chapter this week, another
Mm-hmm.
chapter. You
Mm-hmm.
have some kind of structure to work off of and
Right.
like little deadlines for yourself. It works better. So
Mm-hmm.
when I write a blog, I'm like, okay, I need to publish this many blogs this month, or I need to,
Mm-hmm.
you have that,
Mm-hmm.
target. So the same thing
Target.
with a
Yeah.
book. The book,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be published that week. So it's a
Right.
long term target. So it might be a little more involved, like
Mm-hmm.
the structure and the timeline and everything
Mm-hmm.
needs to be a little more like, detailed than you would do for a
Mm-hmm.
blog. But I think it really helps, and just having the discipline of sitting down and writing, if even if it's for like 30 minutes, even if it's like
Mm-hmm.
500 words,
Mm-hmm.
that really helped me see the book to conclusion. So
Right.
yeah.
Right. Okay. So, I think you are right. So any s- following a structure, following a pattern is helpful for any writer. I mean, whether you are writing a book or whether you're writing a blog, or
Right.
I think I agree with you in that.
And also being accountable to yourself, right? Like no one's going
Right.
to come and ask you unless you have like a
Hmm.
publishing
Hmm.
contract, and then the editor and publisher are like,
Hmm.
okay, we
Hmm.
need you to give us the first three chapters by this
Hmm.
date or that date. Unless you have a publishing contract, there's no one
Right.
you're accountable to. So you have to be
Hmm.
accountable to yourself. Like, okay,
Right.
I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna like finish this many chapters in this
Hmm.
stipulated time or whatever. So
Right. Right.
yeah.
Right. So you mentioned blogging. So this reminds me. This brings me to another question. Is that tell us a little bit about your background, about how your life has been, about your education, how you got to where you are today, and also you mentioned you are a blogger. So how different you feel is blogging versus writing a book? What how different are these two mediums basically? Yeah.
So I'll start with my background in education. So I was born and raised in Chennai, and I lived with grandma for most of my school life. That's why I was very attached to her.
Mm-hmm.
And I did my master's in communication from Madras University, and then I landed a job as an editor. But before I could even complete a year in that company, I got married and I was whisked off to the US to start a new
Mm-hmm.
life. And
Mm-hmm.
then I had my children soon after that. And
Mm-hmm.
I think nearly a decade of my life was spent being a full time mom.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote articles for local magazines, some Indian magazines, and even did a
Mm-hmm.
course in children's literature when I wasn't like
Mm-hmm.
actively working. Then in
Mm-hmm.
2012, I decided to start my own blog. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
something I planned, it just happened out of the blue, but the response was amazing. And I have like my friends from school and college as well as my family to thank. Then,
Mm-hmm.
4 years and several odd jobs later, I finally got a break
Mm-hmm.
and landed a job as a content writer thanks to an old coworker and friend from my,
Mm-hmm.
very first job. Then, a year later, I got my first job in the US as a web content editor. And then
Mm-hmm.
right now, I work as a lead writer for Accenture. And though it took me a very long time to get here because of the gap in my career, I'm so
Right.
grateful like for all the people who believed in me. And I'm just so glad that, I didn't give up and I went after whatever I wanted in
Mm-hmm.
life.
Mm-hmm.
And your next question was about blogging, right? How is blogging different from writing a book?
Right.
So, blogging basically is short form writing, right? So, when you write for the web, you need to keep your content short and engaging. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Everyone tells you that the reader's attention span is limited, right? They don't want to
Right.
scroll and scroll to read your long story. So,
Mm-hmm.
writing a book is very different
Mm-hmm.
because that's long form writing, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
but I kind of approached each chapter like writing a blog to make it less intimidating. So, in my book, the chapters are all unique and standalone. It doesn't matter which order you read them in, although they all have like a common theme running through them, right? So, of course,
Mm-hmm.
this won't work for every book, but I think it worked well for mine.
Right.
And
Okay.
writing a book also involves a lot more research, editing, proofreading, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to writing a blog. And the
Right.
timeline for one is very short, and the other one it can be long and drawn out, depending on
Mm-hmm.
how big your book is, and
Mm-hmm.
how much research you need to do, and all of those factors. So yeah.
Right. Okay. 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 Yeah. Makes sense. I also wanted to know how was your experience been with Wolf Publishing, and did you face any challenges? And in fact, what do you think about the entire publishing industry in today's times? Yeah, I see that these days has publishing become more easier, considering Amazon bringing this self-publishing thing, and with Kindle and ebook also there. So is it more easier? How your experience has been, and uh, Also, has it changed since you started writing? Yeah.
So I did face challenges mostly because I decided to get my book published during the pandemic, right? So
Okay.
2020 is when I
Hmm.
reached out to Wolf Books, and at that point, we weren't sure where the pandemic is going. We were like,
Hmm.
okay, now right now everything is closed, locked down, but things should open up as the cases go down and all that. It
Right.
didn't happen. Like 2021, things hadn't opened up yet, you know.
Right.
So bookstores were closed, book sales were hit very badly,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
distributors didn't want to take on books and stuff like that. So it
Hmm.
was kind of challenging to do and I couldn't do like a proper book launch, right? I couldn't go to
Um.
a bookstore and do a
Bookstore. Hmm.
proper book launch. I had to do it virtually.
Hmm.
So in July 2021 is when I did the virtual launch,
Hmm.
but later in 2022 I ended up doing, because that was something my dad wanted to do, and
Hmm.
I just wanted to like do that for him. So
Hmm.
I ended up doing a um, actual book launch in Madras Literary Society. He was a member of Madras
Hmm.
Literary Society, so I ended up
Okay.
doing a small book launch there.
Okay.
um, but coming back to the question, like, has it changed? It has changed a lot. Like earlier, you couldn't just go out and publish a book, right? You had
Hmm.
to get an agent, you had to get a
Hmm.
publisher to sign a contract with you to,
Right.
promote your book,
Hmm.
all of that stuff. Now, if you want to
Hmm.
pay, you have like these publishing boutiques, and they will just
Hmm.
do everything for you. You give them a
Right.
handsome sum
Hmm.
and they will take care of
Take
everything for
care
you,
of it.
right?
Yeah. Right. Right.
And
Right.
or if you don't want to do that, you can even just self publish. It's become so easy. If
Hmm.
you're like, tech savvy, you know how to like
Hmm.
work through an Amazon Kindle, you can just
Hmm.
get it done. Like you can just go there
Right.
and publish your book in the blink of an
Hmm.
eye. So it's become very easy, but the problem is, there's so much content out there, right? So there's a lot of good
Hmm.
books and there are a lot of bad books out there.
Right.
Like
Hmm.
people with like, um I mean, not much experience, or their language is
Hmm.
not good, or not much expertise, research, whatever. They just go and publish their book on a whim, right?
Right.
So
Hmm.
it's like a lot more content to sift through, and it's very difficult, and it becomes more competitive when you have like so much
Hmm.
content out there, so many books, and your book kind of can get lost in that, you know.
Huh. Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Exactly. Exactly. So everything has its own advantages and disadvantages, I feel. I mean,
yeah.
there are few advantages as well as there are few disadvantages as well. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
with the with the new technology, I think it's more become easier, but at the same time, there are several challenges also. Yes, I agree. I agree with that.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So, uh, coming back to about the book itself. So, what do you uh, hope readers will take away from this book? What is, if you have to call out one thing that they can take away from the book, what would be that one thing about your grandmother? If you want to describe her, probably, so what would be the key takeaway? Yeah.
So my grandma's story is a story of triumph, right? So it's a
Mm-hmm.
story of success despite the odds stacked against you. It's
Mm-hmm.
also a story of a woman's success in a man's world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just any woman. She was a young widow. She was widowed when she was like 36, right? Young
Mm-hmm.
widow
Okay.
with no
Right.
college education, zero work
Hmm.
experience.
Hmm.
There's no like nest egg for her to fall back on. Her son is still in college, not
Hmm.
standing on his own feet. So she had to support him and herself. So,
Hmm.
um, I mean, I think back in those days, that was not something a woman could have done, right?
Hmm.
And yet
Right.
she did that. She became a
Hmm.
businesswoman. She was the first LPG distributor in
Hmm.
India, woman
Hmm.
LPG distributor in India. So I think
Hmm.
that's really commendable,
Hmm.
and I hope my readers will be inspired by her and know that
Hmm.
no challenge is too hard to overcome if you have the right attitude. So she always
Hmm.
had this fighting spirit and this
Hmm.
never say die attitude, and I think that's
Hmm.
what kept her going. Like despite all of
Hmm.
her illnesses, despite all the challenges that she faced, she just had
Hmm.
this like grit and determination to succeed.
Hmm.
Like, I mean, doesn't matter how many times she was knocked down, she just got back up and moved forward, right? So I feel like that's one key takeaway that I want
Hmm.
my readers to, you know,
Right.
take when they
Hmm.
read this book. Yeah.
Right. Yes, I agree now. While reading the book, I had gone through those stories, and uh, yes, and I must say that the readers, the audience, they would be overwhelmed by reading those stories, and it would be really inspirational. And I also believe that, I mean, after reading this book is a tribute to your grandmother, and
Hmm.
I feel there might be lot of such women. They might be a lot of such women in every corner streets of India, or
That's true.
happen to be
That's true.
around the world also, whose stories we don't know. I mean,
That's true.
there might be several women that we know, and reading these such stories, I feel that someone would recall those stories in their household, that oh yes, something that
That's
happened.
very true. That's very true, Anuj, because several people who read my book were like, this reminds me of my grandma, or this reminds me of my
Hmm.
mother, who had to,
Hmm.
like, against all odds, to support the family. They
Right.
were widowed, or they were separated, or
Hmm.
they were thrown out, or, some kind of
Hmm.
tragedy in their lives, but they somehow,
Right.
you know, overcame those
Right.
tragedies, and they
Hmm.
succeeded. So
Right.
yes, I want to say, like, there are a lot of these stories there, these untold stories. So if you
Hmm.
talk to people, you get to understand that,
Right.
they also have these, um, you know, idols in their
Hmm.
families who have experienced something similar as
Hmm.
what my grandma has experienced. And yeah, so it's very heartening to know that
Right.
this many people, like, who have read the book can relate to it because they have
Right.
such people in their lives. And I
Hmm.
also feel
Hmm.
like most human experience is universal, right? Like sadness, death, so many of these things. Like, we think we're all different, but actually all the emotions or the experiences that we have as humans is kind of universal. So sometimes when you tell a story, you're not just telling your story, you're telling the story of many women. So I feel
Right.
that's also there.
Hmm. Sure. Yep. I perfectly agree with that. And so this brings me to another question: is that how did you balance writing with the other aspects of your life, your job, your household, your kids? So how did you do that? How did you manage all the things, along with getting the chapters done and then getting it published? How did you manage to do that? Did you face any challenges? Did you face any difficulties?
uh so writing is always part of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like breathing to me. So if I'm not writing, I feel out of sorts. So I may not
Mm-hmm.
always share what I write, but it's
Mm-hmm.
just something I always find time to do. And
Mm-hmm.
the thing is, we always find time to do the things that really matter to us, right? So I
Right.
wrote Thank You Dadima on weekday mornings when my kids were in school.
Okay.
So, and I write my blogs on weekends whenever I have an idea or a story I really want to share. At this
Mm-hmm.
point, I think writing is kind of baked into my life and my schedule. So
Mm-hmm.
it's an integral part of me and what I do. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't it doesn't feel like I'm balancing it anymore. It just feels like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's just part of what I do. It's like
Mm-hmm.
eating, breathing, showering, that sort of thing. So
Right.
yeah,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree, because it's all about managing your schedule well. It's not
yeah,
just balancing, it's just managing your schedule, and
exactly,
working on what you like the most. Uh,
exactly,
I mean, it's what you are passionate about, doing that, uh, giving
exactly.
that a high priority, and then moving on to other high priority tasks, which
Yeah.
are also important, because after without that, obviously, you would get the bread and butter. So
Mm.
that are also important, but you
Right.
need to give time to those things which you are passionate of, and otherwise, I mean, the results won't come in. Yeah, I agree.
Right. Right. Kind of like what you're doing, Anuj, with the podcast.
Right,
It's not your job, but you're passionate about it, so you're doing
right.
it. So yeah, it's the
Yes.
same with writing for me. So I just
Okay,
do it. Yeah.
okay. So, yeah, so I think we are nearly in the end of the interview. So I want to know, who are some of your favorite writers, favorite authors, uh, and some of their favorite works, any book that you have read in the past, or you are currently reading. Can you list top three books that you have read and like the most, that have made a huge impact on you?
So I think my favorite writers would be P.G. Woodhouse, and
Mm-hmm.
one of my favorite books is the Jeeves and Wooster series. I
Mm-hmm.
find them like really hilarious, and
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, I mean, it's this his story writing style is very humorous and very
Mm-hmm.
unexpected, and very witty. So I really enjoy P.G. Woodhouse. The other one is like you know, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
And in that series, the one I love the most is The Hound of the Baskervilles.
Mm-hmm.
It has an element of horror also in it,
Mm-hmm.
and I like horror. Well, I
Okay.
used to like horror, so yeah. I mean, I feel like my preferences in books have changed as the
Mm-hmm.
years pass. Like there was a phase when I was into medical thrillers, so it was all like
Okay.
Robin Cook and all those
Mm-hmm.
books. And then
Mm-hmm.
there was a phase when I was into more esoteric stuff like so like Richard Bach and
Mm-hmm.
other spiritual writers and things like that, Eckhart Tolle and things like that. So one of
Right.
my favorites books, Richard Bach's books, is Illusions.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, those are my three favorite books, and I keep discovering new writers. Like we have
Mm-hmm.
lovely libraries here in the US, so
Okay.
I keep discovering new writers, and yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
these writers I think have made a major impression on my life because these are the books I read in my formative years. So yeah,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
definitely.
Okay. 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 And what are your plans for the future? Any plans you have to write any other book? Uh, and what genre you would be most comfortable, or if comfortable is not a right word, probably what genre you would like to write? Will it be fiction, or will it be non-fiction, or so? If you want to write a book in the future.
I have been playing with the idea of writing fiction. In fact, Thank You Dadima initially started off as a fiction book, but
Mm-hmm.
then I don't know, I just couldn't. It was more personal to me, so I wanted to write it in
Hmm.
my voice. If I'd written it
Hmm.
in fiction, if it was fiction, then I
Hmm.
couldn't have written it in my voice unless I was
Right.
like in the story. And
Hmm.
so it didn't make sense to me. So that's why I changed it to a memoir.
Memoir. Hmm.
And I have been writing a lot since my dad passed away, just as a way to process
Mm-hmm.
my grief. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
excuse me, I'm not sure
Sure.
if it will one day turn into a book.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've not shared any of that with anyone, but maybe it will turn into
Hmm.
a book. I don't know at this point,
Mm-hmm.
really. So yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So looking forward to that. Maybe if you decide to uh publish that or something, so look forward for another memoir or something of that sort. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, many
Yeah.
people were like, "Oh, now who came to my dad's funeral were like, now you need to write a book about your dad," and I was like, it doesn't work that way. I mean, you have to have
Right.
like the right,
Momentum. Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
no, the
Right.
right motive to do it. Like,
Motive.
it
Yeah.
can't
Sorry.
just be
Motive
like,
is the right
yeah,
word. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. Right.
So,
Okay. So that brings me to the last question of this interview, is that what advice would you like to give someone who is considering writing a memoir or a biography, or for that matter, any kind of book? What is the advice that you would like to give to that author who is just starting to write a book? Can you share some tips for those budding authors who wish to publish their book, whether it is a memoir or any kind of a book? Yeah.
So just write. That is the only advice I have. You make it a
Mm-hmm.
habit. It's like
Mm-hmm.
really about discipline at the end of the day, right?
Right.
You can do all of these other things. You can like promote your book, market it, but if you don't actually sit down and write it, you don't
Mm-hmm.
have a book to like promote or market. So
Mm-hmm.
if you write, say, like 1,000 words a day, at the end of 1 month, you'll have a 30,000 word
Mm-hmm.
book, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just about that discipline of sitting down and writing. And don't worry about editing and making it perfect. Just write and get it all on paper. The rest will follow. And also, sort of making yourself visible as an author, right? So I had a blog, so I had people who
Mm-hmm.
would follow the blog.
Mm-hmm.
So I already had people who were like reading my content over the years. So they knew what they were getting with the book. So make yourself visible as an author, to uh, not just your friends and family, but also like, everyone else. Like have an author page and start writing content, start talking about your book, create a buzz, all of that stuff. So that's also important. But the very first thing is to actually sit down and write and get all of your thoughts down on paper. And then I feel like the rest will just follow organically.
Right. I definitely agree, and I like that quote. Just right. I mean, this that is the best advice you can give to any budding author, or for that matter, any writer. I feel, and anyone who wants to write a blog also.
Hmm.
Discipline is very key factor to just
Correct.
go and write down. I mean, most of the times, we just. In fact, me also, if whenever I start to write a blog also, I get engrossed in editing that I forget about writing,
Hmm.
publishing that blog. I end
Hmm.
up going too much of editing
Hmm.
that blog that I
Hmm.
tend to don't publish that blog. So
Hmm.
yeah, you're right. I mean, it we need to get into a habit of that discipline that we need to write once a week or
Yeah.
once a month or
Or
whatever
even every day.
time.
Like you
Yeah,
can, I used
right.
to journal like every day. Like
Hmm.
it's not something I share in my personal journal, just a way to
Right.
like let the thoughts flow, right? And this is something
Right.
my English teacher in college,
Hmm.
Dr. Rita Cherian, she passed away, but
Hmm.
she told us to do something called free writing. And I
Hmm.
find that very useful, especially like if you are one of those people who are like, oh my God, I have a writer's block. I'm
Hmm.
not able to like, be productive. I'm just staring at the screen or staring at a blank
Hmm.
piece of paper.
Hmm.
Then just take out a journal and just write whatever is coming. Just let it flow, like all your thoughts, without filtering it, without editing it. Just write. And
Right.
once you get
Hmm.
into that flow, right, then it's
Hmm.
easier when you actually sit down to write a blog post or an article or a chapter in your book.
Hmm.
It just flows. So it's
Right.
like basically just get into the habit of writing daily. It doesn't have to be, okay, I'll only sit down and write if I have to publish something or share something. It doesn't have to be that way.
Hmm.
You get
Right.
into the habit of writing every day. You don't even have to share it
Hmm.
with anyone. You can have it in a journal that nobody sees.
Hmm.
But because you've been, practicing writing, you have that flow. The thoughts
Hmm.
flow, the words flow. So,
Hmm.
and I recommend writing with a pen and a paper rather than typing. I know
Hmm.
some people are like more comfortable typing, but
Typing. Yeah.
most people, I feel like the thoughts flow better when you're writing with a pen on
Writing the
paper.
diary.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
I always do that. Like
Hmm.
even before I type something in my blog, I usually write it in a book,
Hmm.
where I write all my blogs and then I type it up. And that also has an advantage because you're going through the material twice, right? So you pick up
Hmm.
any typos, grammatical, flow, all of those things. You kind of pick up when you're doing the second round or you're
Hmm.
typing it
Second
up.
round. Yeah.
So Yeah,
Yes.
and another thing is when you're doing a blog post, you can you don't have to publish it immediately. Like,
Hmm.
you can keep it in draft, come back to it
Hmm.
another day, and then
Hmm.
read through it, edit it, and then publish it. But
Publish
give
it.
yourself like
Hmm.
a deadline. Okay, blog
Hmm.
post needs to go out by the end of the week. So whatever editing I
Hmm.
need to do, I'll do it, and then it's good enough to go. And it's just a blog
Hmm.
post, it's not a book. Like a book needs
Right.
like more thorough proofreading, editing. You have to send it to another person to do it. You can't be
Hmm.
editing your own book because you're too close to the material. But a blog post
Hmm.
is not like that. So blog post is like, I feel more,
Hmm.
what do I say? Uh, it's more ephemeral, right? Compared to a book. A
Hmm.
book is kind of permanent. Your blog
Hmm.
post gets buried. Like every time you
Ah.
post something new, that
Hmm.
blog post is on the top and the most recent and the most read. The others just get buried. They're not, and the
Hmm.
importance wanes over time, is what I'm trying to say. So do your best effort, edit it, and just know that it's not something that people are going to keep coming back to. It's just something they're going to read and then move on. So you should
Right.
also do that. You should write, edit, publish, move on, right? Not sit with
Hmm.
that blog post for like a
Hmm.
month, right? It's not worth it. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
True, true. I like that process actually that you mentioned, right? Edit, publish, and then move on. And that's
Hmm.
really a catchy phrase that I think the listeners or whoever would be listening to this episode, they would they would have some kind of a key takeaway
Hmm.
from this episode, that write, edit, publish, and then move on to the next. And then again, it's a kind of a circular cycle that
Hmm.
they need to follow. You write, you edit, and then publish, and then move on to the next one. So it's a
Yeah,
cycle
but
that goes
yeah,
on.
but I
Yeah.
just want to say that's only for like short form blog posts. Of course, for a
Hmm.
book, it's
Right.
different. Yeah,
Right.
it's a totally
Yes, of
different
course. Yeah.
process. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And yes, you mentioned something about writer's block.
Hmm.
I was curious to know because I've heard many people have it. So did you encounter that particular thing called writer's block while you were writing the book, or you've written blogs? So did you at any time, any stage of your career, have faced this situation where your mind was simply blocked? You don't know where to go, and stuff, what to write. So did you face that, and how did you encounter it?
Yeah, like I said, every writer goes through it, and they all have their own processes of like working through it.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes, like, it helps to just, walk away from the
Mm.
paper or the computer or whatever, and
Mm.
just focus on something else. And then you'll
Right.
find when you're doing, so most of my ideas, I know many people have shared this also, most of the ideas you get when you're doing something which doesn't require too much, something mundane, like
Right.
say if I'm folding clothes or washing dishes
Mm.
or doing something like that, that's when
Mm.
ideas come to me. It's
Mm.
something like which doesn't need too much mental
Mm.
energy. You're like just doing something just mechanically. That's when
Mm.
the ideas come to you. So it always helps to like, and I know some writers, they go for a walk just to clear their head,
Mm.
or they do something totally different
Different.
from,
Yeah.
yeah, from what they were doing to like get out
Mm.
of that space. So that always helps,
Mm.
like, uh, to do that. And like I said,
Mm.
having a regular, um, what do you call it,
Regular
discipline, right, or a
discipline.
writing
Yeah.
practice really helps, because
Mm.
I
Mm.
find like I don't have blocks that often. Like,
Okay.
yes, there are some days when I don't feel like writing, but I know that it's not going to be there for like a
Mm.
week or a month or
Long term.
something. I'll
Yeah.
get out of
Okay.
it. Okay, today is just
Mm.
like, everyone has their good and bad days, right?
Mm.
But
Mm.
I never feel like, okay, I'm going to be so blocked that I can't write. So,
Mm.
and
Right.
if I feel that way, then I know I need to go back and start journaling and writing,
Right.
and getting back into the flow. So it's basically about letting the thoughts flow
Flow.
and
Yeah.
letting your emotions flow, so you can actually put it down as words
Mm.
on paper. So
Mm.
that is basically my advice to like people who have writer's block.
Right.
And again, it's just for something that works for me. Everyone is different. Like if you talk to like different
Hmm.
writers, their whole process is different. Some people like to wake up really early in the morning and set aside a chunk
Hmm.
of time. Some of them, they just kind of do it as part of their day-to-day activity. Some of them even do it while they have full-time jobs. Some of them, they like to go on retreats. They like to go find a place in a cabin in some hill station and seclude themselves and do it. Some people can't do
Hmm.
that. Like, they need to be around
Hmm.
people. They need to have like tight
Hmm.
deadlines to have the motivation to write. So
Hmm.
it's like you need to figure out who you are as a writer and
Hmm.
what works for you. Like, you can read a million things about what worked for other writers, and those are just
Hmm.
like pointers to you. And you can, yeah, go ahead and try all of them. But at the end of the day,
Hmm.
you have to know who you are as a writer and what works for you.
Right.
And that is a process in itself, which every writer
Right.
needs to go through, in my opinion.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Well, so thank you so much, Damayanti, for taking time out to come for this conversation. I mean, it was lovely talking to you, especially about your book. Thank you, Dadima. I had I was excited reading it, and I feel that the listeners, they would buy this book and read it, and they would be excited too. So I wish you all the best for your book, and also it was lovely talking to you to share your expertise, to share your experience, share your guidance on anyone to anyone who want to write the book. So it was lovely talking to you, having the conversation with you, and thanks to coming to my podcast as well. And we'll be waiting for your another book that you would plan to write, or that you plan to write. So thank you once again for coming to this episode.
Oh, thank you, Anuj. And I hope the listeners will pick up a copy of my book. Thank
Sure.
you,
Yeah.
Dadima,
Yeah.
and be inspired by the story of my grandma. The book
Yes,
is
I'm sure. Yeah.
available
Yeah.
on
Mm-hmm.
Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
Paperback is available in India, and ebook is
Mm-hmm.
available across the world. So
Okay.
I hope you'll pick up a copy. Thank you again.
Sure. Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Damayanti. Thank you. Well, friends, with that, we've come to an end of this episode of Mindful Conversation series in my podcast, The Anuj Kapoor Talk Show. Stay tuned for more interesting conversations that I will bring to you in my upcoming episodes. Click or tap on the follow link if you haven't done so already, and don't forget to press the bell icon so that you receive notifications for my future episodes. That's it for this episode. See you in the next episode with another exciting personality. This is your friend and host Anuj Kapoor signing off. Bye for now.